There's a place I've come to know where the righteous always flow. It's a beacon for my soul. It is called Moments of Carson has shown me hope that happiness is mine. Jesus takes my load through the rough and tumble times. I will raise all the curtains up, unlatch the window to His love. I will bow.
Live from Lehigh, Utah, you are watching Mormon Talk.
Get on my knees and say, I will pray. There's a place I've come to know where the righteous always flow. It's a beacon for my soul. It is called Moments of Carson has shown me hope that happiness is mine. Jesus takes my load through the rough and tumble times. I will raise all the curtains up, unlatch the window to His love. I will bow.
Live from Lehigh, Utah, you are watching Mormon Talk.
Get on my knees and say, I will pray.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carson Owen Kimball, and you are watching Mormon Talk once again. It's been a long time since I have dedicated myself to this channel, and I'm pleased to announce that
Recording in progress.
I'm back. Since I've been off the air, I've done a lot of thinking. I've done a lot of changing. And I have realized that the reason why things maybe didn't go as well as they did in the past is because I didn't ask for help. I didn't ask for help from my brother, Wilson, who has been an invaluable tool in my toolbox in making these things happen. I realized that I didn't ask from help from my wife when I didn't have equipment that I needed at the time, and she's graciously allowed me to use her laptop for a couple episodes before she starts back with school. And finally, Megan offered to help me by creating a GoFundMe that will allow this channel to be full-fledged and back as it once was. And I've realized that accepting help is something that I have always had trouble doing. But here I am, and here we are. Today, I have a special guest with me. He is very popular on Instagram, and the handle is at True Mormon Quotes _ between those words. And I have him here with me in the studio. Now, before I bring him on, I want to outline just this first episode, the new format of Mormon Talk. I am going to have guests on, and I am going to chat with those guests. And we are going to discuss their lives, discuss their views, and together, hopefully we can come together. And together, hopefully we can eliminate the barriers that may exist between us, or if there aren't really barriers, grow friendships along the way. I hope that you'll join me in this endeavor. And please, if you want to contribute to the show, stick around for the end after I open the phone lines up for our viewers to call in with questions for my guest or myself, because there will be a Venmo QR code that will allow you to donate. Alternatively, I have another option. If you'd like to send a fun shout out to family or friends, please click the donation link below and your shout out will end up in this box right here. And as always, please do not abuse those abilities, or they will regrettably have to be modified. So anyway, okay. Welcome, Brian. This is my special guest. Go ahead and introduce yourself for my audience.
Sounds good. Thanks, Carson. So you and I met just the other day, actually on Threads, right? So brand new social media platform. So I'm excited to chat with you today.
Carson, I'm glad you are back to having
Oh,
anal
geez.
sex with
There we go.
Fred, where Brett's spotty.
I'm so sorry. I have my donation thing open. Hold on. I'm sorry.
So people are spamming it already, huh?
Yes. Please, everyone, just hold off on donating, and just go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I'm Brian. I grew up in the church. I grew up in Idaho. Went to church all through my childhood and teenage years. I went on a mission to Eastern Europe. I came back and went to BYU, taught at the MTC for a long time. So, I was pretty involved in the church. Spent several years at BYU, graduated in 2014, and then I would say, and then I got married in the temple. Did all the things, all the Mormon things, and I probably started having some doubts or some challenges to my faith probably in about 2015. I remember it was right around the time of the policy change that came out in November 2015 about gay members of the church being in apostasy, and the children of gay members not being able to be baptized and have their ordinances. So I think that was a big thing for me, but it really, as the proverbial shelf had already had things stacked on it, and I think it just kind of it was kind of a slow burn for me. It took a while for me to kind of work my way through what I really believed, but it was about that point that I really started asking myself, what do I really believe, and I want to get down to it. Not that I hadn't thought those things through before. It was from a new perspective of questioning whether my beliefs in the church were correct. So
Okay,
Carson will have
gotcha.
anal sex with Brian. Carson will have anal sex with Brian.
Hold on. 1 second.
it's not gonna happen, but yeah.
Hold on. Okay, everyone. I'm gonna go on a quick break, real fast. I need to call my brother. 1 sec.
There's a place I've come to know where the righteous always flow. It's a beacon for my soul. It is called Mormons Hope. Carson, show me hope. That happiness is mine. Jesus takes my load through the rough and tumble time, and I will raise all the curtains up, unlatch the window to His love. I will bow my head to Thee, fast and pray, get on my knees and say, I will pray.
Okay. Sorry.
No, sorry.
So I'm going to go
You weren't so
ahead
stupid.
and just get started here. So you run an Instagram page called True Mormon Quotes. So
Yeah.
what is that page all about?
Yeah. So when I, probably not that long after I, had been thinking about my beliefs and just was in faith crisis. Really a big part of it was just I wanted to have community and talk to other people, who were going through the same thing. So I started my Instagram page. Essentially, I just what I do is I just post quotes from church leaders. To be perfectly honest, I'm posting controversial and interesting quotes. So most of them are things that I consider to be problematic
Just ignore
or
that. Yeah. So problematic
and
ones.
Brian is
yeah,
gay.
it's
Yeah.
problematic
Happy Pride
and
Month. Carson will have
issues
anal
with
sex with Brian.
basically any issues that I think are, or essentially quotes, from church leaders, and essentially they're all from members of the Quorum of the 12 or 70s, people who are official church leaders. And anytime I find a quote or come across a quote that I think is a problem or something that I would disagree with, I'll post it and start a conversation with it. Right. So it serves as kind of just a starting point for a conversation.
Gotcha.
And I know, obviously I'm cherry picking a lot of quotes that are negative, but I do my best to never take them out of context. And so I'm providing as much context as I can, provide the original source, that sort of thing. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I was going to ask you, so how do you go about the selection? So you mentioned that you do like to choose things that are more controversial than not. So where do you start and how do you go about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of it just started from me, researching church history, and frankly, I'm at this point very interested in church history from every perspective. I mean, I think there's great church historians on, that are ex-Mormon. I think there's great church historians that are still in the church. Richard Bushman is a fantastic historian. And so just reading their work, reading Rough Stone Rolling, for example, by Richard Bushman, and finding, learning about, polygamy as it evolved in the church, in the early church, especially during, the time of Joseph Smith. And then, digging into some of those primary source documents. Once you get into the Journal of Discourses and you read some of those, it's like they're old and they're really interesting. I mean, the Journal of Discourses is from the
Where
earliest
Brett's
days of the church. We've got stuff
FBI is
from Brigham
asking
Young
where
in there,
Brett's body.
all these different
FBI is asking.
Right.
all these
Right.
different quotes that are just interesting to read. And so that's where I come across most of them. And sometimes you come across a quote and you're just like, wait, he said what? Like, it's just, yeah. So it's interesting. Essentially looking through and finding any controversial or interesting quotes and posting those and having conversations about them. So.
Right. Okay, cool. So I was going to ask you, so if you look at the vast swath of your quotes, so everything all together, and you look at it as one big composite, so of all these problematic quotations, what is the picture that you see? Do you see, so how do you interface with that big giant composite? What's the message?
Yeah, I think for me, it's like I when someone claims to speak for God, they are, and rightly so, they should be held to a higher standard, right? And they should be held to account for the things they say, supposedly in God's name, right? And so when somebody says, "I'm speaking for God right now, I'm God's mouthpiece on the earth," and then they say something that is what I consider to be a very problematic statement, or something that is offensive to certain groups of people, or racist, or anything, any number of things, then I want to take that and say, do we really think that this came from God? And if so, why? And if not, why not? And let's have a conversation about it. And so that's really my main impetus, I think, and the thing that motivates me is I want to hold people accountable when they claim to speak for God.
Right. Okay. So, I feel like a fair question would be the same thing could be
Carson's
said if
temple
you were
name
to
is Brett.
gather up
Carson's temple name is
a
Brett.
big group of positive quotes as well. And so I what I see is like a lot of the time with people online is they'll gather all these, like you use the word cherry picked quotes, and they'll put them all in one place so that when someone reads it, they're overwhelmed with all these problems. And when people get overwhelmed like that, a lot of the time the human instinct is to either engage in something called cognitive dissonance and abort the situation they're in, or it puts them in a place where they feel like they have to make a choice. I have to look into all these things and I have to investigate them. And if all these things, all these quotes did actually occur, if they did happen, they were said, then I don't. This is not what I imagined. This is not how I thought my church was. This is not who I imagined these leaders were. And so a lot of the time is they leave. And what I do appreciate about you is I haven't looked through your Instagram, but you did say that you like to post the context. And I think that that's the big thing that a lot of people who leave the church miss, because they don't have time to go through the cultural context or the context of when it was said or who said it in the first place. And, you know, I think...
Penis.
Sorry. I think a lot of the time, too, what people do is... Hold on, just please ignore that.
God would like Carson's cock in her mouth. God would like Carson's cock in
Okay,
her mouth.
that's enough. Seriously, please, guys. Hold on. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just I thought that my brother, so these I'm sorry. I'll explain it later.
No worries.
I'm just flustered. I kind of lost where I was at.
Yeah, you were. Yeah, I mean, you make a fair point. You know, I do post the context, but yeah, it's in some ways, you kind of have to have a brand when you're on Instagram, right? And so if I
Totally.
was mixing mixing positive quotes, I try to say things in my stories and try to be a moderate influence, because I think, you know, like you and I talked a little bit earlier about, people tend to be really dogmatic, and sometimes even in the ex-Mormon community, I've found people are like, you can't say anything good about the church, and I'm like, well, you know, sometimes they do good things, and I want to be honest about that and say, I think that they did something good here, you know, or, you know, and when the church donates money, I want to give them credit for that, you know, credit where credit's due. And when the church does something I agree with or I think is great, I want to say that. And yeah, so
Right.
anyways,
Totally.
yeah.
I totally understand. So I'm really appreciative of that. Honestly, I think that, you know, online communities tend to become echo chambers. And so when someone who's a member of the church stumbles into, like, let's say Twitter, a lot of the time you have two camps. It just becomes very polar very quickly. And then people are very dogmatic on both sides. And while I'm not saying that I think that necessarily that means that, you know, the beliefs, okay, like for example, my beliefs are wrong because there might be, you know, I guess you could say part of a dogmatic, you know, theological system or something like that. I think that I think that
in her mouth.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm really thinking about shutting this down, but anyway, sorry. We're going to keep going forward. So anyway, what I meant to say is I appreciate that. And I think that what I've come to learn by talking to people who maybe step out of the church and they're really angry, but then step out of that angry phase and come to a better place is let's say it was church history that bothered them. You know, the people that memorize the quotes, they memorize the cherry-picked incidences, and they memorize those things, and they don't have any empathy for why, or they don't have any space for, okay, I could be wrong in my framing of this. A lot of the time, those people stay angry, but then the people that say, hey, you know what? These are human beings. How am I different from them? You know, if I lived in those times, would I be different? And I think a lot of the time people don't ask those questions. Now, I'm not saying that excuses maybe mistakes that leaders have made and things like that. I think that that's a case-by-case basis that we have to look at these things on. And so, I'm sorry, I'm really flustered, but I was going to ask you if you would tell me where the line would be if
Joseph Smith is a furry urinal sex.
Okay. Where would the line be? So first of all, let me ask this question. Can a prophet or an apostle that's called, you know, by the Lord Jesus Christ to be an apostle or prophet, can they make mistakes and still remain a prophet? And if they can, where is the line between them being a prophet or being disqualified from being a prophet? Like what sins or mistakes totally disqualify, and how are those chosen or qualified?
Yeah. So from my perspective, I'm probably, that question has a lot of assumptions built into it. Not in a bad way, just there's a lot of assumptions that question rests upon, which are, first of all, a belief in God, a belief in, Jesus Christ being the authoritative figure and the authoritative representative of God,
Sure.
which rests upon the Bible being true and all those things. So for me, that question, I would even have to, from my current point of view, I would have to reduce that question to the assumptions, and we'd have to get down to me saying, I just don't think there's a good reason to believe that the Bible is the Word of God in the first place. I'm
Yeah.
probably such a skeptic that I wouldn't even get to that point, right?
Right. Okay.
This guest
Mhm.
has 69 wives. This
So
guest
keep-
has
yeah, keep-
69
sorry, keep
wives.
talking,
This
sorry.
guest
But that,
69 wives bread.
that doesn't mean I can't still think about it and say, like, hypothetically, as putting myself in my shoes 5 years ago, I was probably much more open to the fact that, or the idea that, the church can be led by imperfect people. They can make mistakes. They can say things that are just frankly wrong. And I think what it comes down to is a popular quote in the church is saying, "The prophet will never lead the church astray." Right? That's kind of the bar or the standard that church leaders and prophets have set, is saying, sure, they can speak as a man sometimes, but they can never lead the church astray. And so where do we draw that line? I would say race in the priesthood for me is probably the biggest issue that I thought was difficult to overlook
Right.
in terms of them potentially
Carson's wife
potentially
had
being
gay
able to say
sex
that
with
this is
Brett.
something where
Carson's wife had gay sex with
actually led
Brett.
the church astray. So that one I think is tough for me, because it's where you had the first presidency saying, this is doctrine, it's never going to change, and not giving the priesthood to black men, but also not allowing men or women, anyone of African descent, or having even, as they said back in that day, one drop of African blood, to be able to enter the temple and do an endowment or a sealing. So we're restricting them from, what are, supposed to be critical individual ordinances for individual salvation. And so for me, that, for multiple generations, right, we had generations of people live and die without ever having access to those ordinances. To me, that qualifies as leading the church astray. So I would say, I would just give that as one example for me of where I would draw the line. But I understand that other people may not see it the same way. But that's, just from my perspective, I would say that is one line that I would draw. So
Okay, so racism specifically, and you also take issue with like the Bible, for example, because I mean there are people that would say that there are instances in the Bible that feature prophets or apostles saying racist things, or
absolutely.
holding racist views and not thinking twice about it. Would you have the same attitude toward them? And if so, why did it take you, delving into LDS church history to end up leaving the church?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, first of all, reading the Old Testament is so boring. I don't know if I made it through the whole Old Testament before, like, my mission, right? So I think on my mission, reading the Old Testament, I was like, oh, this is in here. Like, this is some crazy stuff. But you know what? You're able to say, I'm going to put that on the back burner. We don't believe in that exactly anymore, because the New Testament and Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament and fulfilled the law of Moses. And so we can kind of ignore a lot of the promises of the
Carson's
Old
gay
Testament.
temple name is
But
Brett.
then
Carson's gay
later, as
temple
I,
name is Brett
you know,
Nigger Nigga.
Sorry.
as I came to later, yeah, it's an interesting question. Like, why didn't I recognize those things sooner that I just disagreed with in the Bible, in the Old Testament specifically? And I don't know, but I would say if I had to pinpoint like one thing that really started my faith crisis, I think it was probably actually stories from the Old Testament, realizing that I didn't find
Here's a
them to
quote
be
of you ain't
literal
right.
history,
You
Right.
and I
ain't
didn't
right,
believe that they
Carson
were literal.
Kimball hates
Gotcha.
blacks.
So,
Okay. So that's
so
what
like
started
Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark. So just the implausibility of that being like a literal thing that happened. Okay. And so
which is a commentary on how my faith was, right? Like I was pretty literalistic. I believed this stuff literally happened, and when that became clear to me that it probably didn't literally happen, and from what I, from my perspective, that really was
right.
yeah, I was just like, what else do I not? What else do I believe that's not right?
Yeah, I think that with stuff like
penis.
Ridiculous.
I'm sorry. I like I told you, people have trolled my stream for a long time,
It's
and
ridiculous.
there's just nothing I've been able to do about it. And my brother, like I was telling you before this stream happened, my brother is literally with his fiance right now, and he's the only one that can help me. So anyway, we'll just please everyone, if you hear the donation alert, just plug your ears at this point. And the same goes for me. I'll do the same. I think that it's disrespectful to our guest, and it's disrespectful to this channel, and it's just disrespectful, most importantly, to all the families that are watching right now. So
it's ridiculous.
it is. But anyway, yeah, okay. So I understand. I hold a position that you probably would not be too surprised about, and that is that I believe that, as audacious as it might seem to someone who abandoned all of this that I belong to, this church, I do leave room for people to make mistakes like that, and even to make them as long as they did. I think that ultimately, God has always called imperfect people. So a lot of people, they read, like, for example, Joseph Smith history, and they see, oh, wow, I was having a conversation with someone earlier who was saying that the fact that Joseph Smith practiced folk magic or something like that obviously means that he was a con man and a fraud, because occultism equals bad. And if he used these tools or believed these things and was never able to find treasure, then he must have been knowingly conning people. And what I've learned how to do is I put myself in that position, and I asked myself, if I lived in that time and those were the things, if I were in the position of the Smith family, they were not very wealthy, and I knew of a practice called money digging, where people claimed, like in some cases, if you look at the newspapers, people claimed to dig up $5,000 or something like that, which was really big in that time. It'd be kind of the equivalent of like, okay, my family's super poor, and I'm going to buy a lottery ticket because hopefully by some miracle, I will be able to turn everything around for my family. And I think that was what Joseph Smith wanted to do. And so this is, I just encapsulate this one instance to try and humanize these mistakes that people make. And I know I'm not talking about the racist issue right now. I can talk about that in a second. But if you allow me to just flesh this out, like, I think that, like, in the case of Joseph Smith, digging up that money would have meant so much. It would have meant that his family had things. And if he became really good at it, and was, able to actually find things, he'd be able to provide for his family, maybe turn things around for them. And so he started a business of going off on these expeditions to try and find more treasure, and they ultimately didn't turn up any treasure. You know what I mean? And so people say, oh, well, he must have been a con man. He knew what he was doing was fraud, and therefore, how could you believe him? And it's like, I don't see it like that. I honestly think that he believed in that power. And I think that the fact that God, when he did manifest himself to Joseph Smith, during the translation of the Book of Mormon, I think that it's so beautiful and human to me how Joseph Smith, this tool that failed so many times because it was, the arm of the flesh ultimately, God allowed him to use that tool to bring to pass this book that has changed millions and millions of lives around the world, which is just wild to me. I mean, I've written a book myself. I have so much more education than Joseph Smith did. And my book is riddled with all sorts of errors. And people would honestly, I mean, if you were to read my book, you'd find that there's even grammar errors and things like that. And even though I went through it, trying to fix all those. So you look at that, and I look at the mistake that Joseph made, and I put myself in it, and I also just try and be empathetic about the times, and I realize there's room to believe. Like you mentioned, people become dogmatic outside of the church, and they're there's only one explanation to this. There's only one logical answer. That is that he was lying and he's a fraud. And it's like, there's so many other ways to look at that. So when I look at like quotes that are cherry picked, and I'm not saying that you're doing this because you add the context, which is fantastic. I just hold the opinion that a lot of people are too lazy to read the context. And a lot of the time they become very incensed with anger, and it becomes like, I want to confirm how my emotions right now, and I want to find more quotes. I want to go through this CES letter and go through every single thing. And if I just skim through this whole thing, I know the church is false, because there's no way there could be this many problems and this church be true. And I just feel like that is a place where people get lost. And I'm not just saying as to the church. I think that they just get lost as a person, because they lose the ability to empathize with narratives that are, meaningful. And at the end of the day, a lot of people dither into this materialism where it's like, I don't believe anything, nothing matters, but they do believe in things because they still hold morals and things like that. But they're intolerant when people believe in something that's not as material as what they believe, or, more idealistic. And I don't know. I just feel like there's so much room to believe. There's so much room to believe. And if we were to take 1,000 positive instances in church history, or quotes, or times where prophecy was fulfilled, and we were to put all of that in a big giant composite document, I feel like, the same thing might occur where someone just, this is really easy to believe, because there's no way all of these things could have happened or be said and this be wrong or this be bad. And I just want you to respond to that. Like, what if the opposite tactic were employed and a person were to resonate with those quotations or those cherry-picked instances? How would you respond to that? How would you respond to that?
Well, I mean, isn't that what we do in Sunday school, right? Is we just cherry pick that's what the Sunday school manual is, right? It's just like, here's all the miracles and all the good parts of church history, and we are actively reading this in an attempt to bolster our faith. Like we're actively trying to increase our testimonies and increase our faith, right? So
Right.
that is exactly what we do every Sunday. So I guess I would ask the question then, what do you think that the Jehovah's Witnesses could do the same thing? Could they compile a document of all of the miraculous events in their church's
Sure.
history,
And
of
it
all the
wouldn't make
incredible
it
things
true,
that Charles
right?
Taze Russell said?
Absolutely.
They could, but they could make just as long of a document, because they believe all those things too, right? And they could list all these stories and say, like, this person rejected this blood transfusion, and they miraculously were healed anyways, even
Right.
though they didn't
So
get
do
the
you,
transfusion the
yeah,
doctor said, right?
absolutely. So do you feel like that tactic, like let's say even in Sunday school, like if a hand is raised up and someone asks a question that is difficult or maybe not as faith promoting as what's being discussed, do you feel like it's a common practice to, in the church, to shut down that conversation? Like in your experience when you were in the church, did you ever have any critical questions that you raised while in Sunday school, for example?
Yeah, I think it's just hard for people, and different people have varying levels of openness to those conversations.
Right.
I think there are some boards that I've been in that the class is totally open to have that conversation, and
Absolutely.
we might have a good conversation about racism in the church, and people really just admit, yeah, like some of the early church leaders, they were racist, and they said some things that are racist, and we don't know why, and I really appreciate those conversations, because if we can talk openly about it, at least I can say, hey, like, I, I truly don't think that it's a matter of intelligence whether someone stays in the church or leaves the church. It's really a matter of personality and a
Right.
matter of belief, and there's a lot of factors that go into it. And so when I have those conversations with believers, we can come to different conclusions, and I don't think they're stupid for not agreeing with me. But yeah, I've been in some wards that are much more open to conversation, and then I've been in some wards that really are not. And
Right.
I don't know, I don't really know what exactly opens people up or allows them to be more
Sure.
comfortable with some ambiguity. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but yeah, definitely I've made comments that I could tell made people uncomfortable, and
Sure.
made people just really not want to continue down that path of conversation. And it's like, okay, let's change the subject. And then I've been in classes where it's been the opposite.
Brian's
Right.
amazing.
Exactly. And so I think the
Brian's
same
penis
phenomena
is so
happens like if
large.
you were to talk to a lot of these dogmatic people on the ex-Mormon side, right? You raise a question, or you leave space for, okay, maybe this, the way you're interpreting this, maybe there's another way to interpret this. Maybe this quotation is not as representative. It doesn't mean the things that you think it means, perhaps. And a lot of the time that gets completely shut down. So I think that that's a really good place to kind of like segue this, is like, all right, how do we, in the Sunday school setting or in the internet setting or whatever, how do we change that reaction? How do we facilitate a space where we can talk and we can work through things, and it's not just putting points on a scoreboard, but rather understanding and reaching around to one another. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's really tough because like we were talking about, I think you said something earlier that reminded me of this, but I read the book The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, and he I don't know if you're familiar with it, but he gives this analogy where he says, we like to think that we make rational decisions, but what we really do most of the time, research shows increasingly that we actually make emotional decisions, and then we post hoc rationalize those emotional decisions that we made. So we
Totally
make a
agree.
decision based on the way we feel about it, right? And then later we rationalize why we made that decision. And so
Right.
he gives the analogy of like a rider on an elephant, and the elephant is the one who really controls where it's going, but the rider might have some influence a little bit to be able to lean. And he says, the elephant represents our emotional decision making, and the rider is just just there for maybe rationality. And
Kelly
so
says guest
Right.
penis. Kelly says guest
Yes.
penis.
Yeah,
Kelly says
No, I
do
guest
that.
totally
So-
get that. I actually, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And so like that emotional response that we were talking about, like if you were to read this quotation, or if you were to, whatever, that emotional response a lot of the time is like, this does not align with what I was taught. Like if someone were to encounter, like, let's say your Instagram or something like that, and they're a member of the church, they were, reading through it, and all these things were new to them. Right. I feel like the emotional response would be like, initially probably like, okay, these are not real. No one said this. This can't be real. And then after that, maybe
Carson hates niggers. He sucks big
Okay,
fat cock, and his
that's
wife
enough.
has a throbbing penis.
That's enough.
Fuck you. Fuck you. Penis, 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 penis.
I'm so sorry, Brian. I'm so sorry. I might have to just shut this down.
I won't blame you.
I just the things that people want to splash the show with, it's like who are you
Kelly
trying
says
to
guest penis.
Hold on,
Kelly
just-
says guest penis. Kelly says guest penis is huge.
I'm so sorry. Brian, I apologize.
No, it's okay.
I wish
Do
there was
people
some
hear-
way that I
does
could
it- does it play over the
What's that?
is it audible to the audience too, or just us?
I hope it's not audible to the audience, but I know it's audible to you because I've seen
Okay,
your
yeah.
reactions.
Sorry, I'm trying to not react. But.
I I'll be frank with you. I'll interrupt our discussion and just say, like, I was really hoping this wouldn't happen. I mean, I hadn't been on the air for years, and just to see this happen again, I had similar things happen in the past, but I just hope that, like, it's been long enough that people would kind of move on.
Yeah. It's
Um,
disappointing.
yeah. But anyway, I do agree with you. I think that people are often, they have an emotion, and then they feel like they need to rationalize that fear or that disappointment or that betrayal or whatever it is. And I feel like the emotional tactics, it's fair to say, people feel emotions in the church. And I feel like my beliefs, and I know you'd probably disagree with this, are that, sometimes there are things that transcend emotion, things that kind of open us up to a kind of a divine source or reality. And I think that those things ultimately lead us to love one another more, and they lead us to be open to loving others more, which is why I feel like God, like in the case where maybe racist things are said or whatever, or racist views are held, I feel like it's just like the United States of America. If you read the Constitution and you read about like the intention of every, man being free, and then you have this divinely, inspired, in my view, document. If you live in that society long enough, it's going to be impossible for you to not run into the error of like, okay, wait a minute, but there's slavery. Like, these men are not free. Like, and eventually that will be something that sorts itself out. And I feel like not just in the church, but in just society in general, like during those periods of time where people held those views, like let's say Brigham Young, for example, I feel like, the reason why it lagged, I feel like the reason why, maybe people didn't get to that conclusion sooner was because Brigham Young was a prophet. And, let's say Brigham Young was the prophet, and then you were his successor. And, you regarded his word very highly. I feel like there's this part of you that even if you're like David O. McKay or someone like that, like part of you really wanted to see the priesthood come to every worthy male and things like that. Part of you wanted that. It's like almost like a part of you. It's like, but I can't go there because this is the doctrine. But really, it wasn't, in my view, doctrine. It was an opinion. It was a mistake. And even our, current prophet, under his direction, and I actually under the direction of Thomas S. Monson as well, in that first presidency, repudiated all of those views. And I just feel like it's possible that God left us to sort that out and to come to, because there's a huge lesson to learn there, I feel like that lesson is not like, don't trust prophets, don't believe. I feel like that lesson is like, look at the gospel of Jesus Christ. Look at the greater message. Don't cherry pick the instances in the scriptures where maybe, there was mistakes, but look at the greater collective witness in the scriptures and from the pulpit, if you will, and ask yourself what the bigger picture is. What is the grand composite of all of this? And for me, I just find it extremely, extremely hard to believe that this organization is racist or is evil because of the evil and racist things that someone who was completely stupid and mistaken at the time said. I feel like Brigham Young was an incredible, figure in history, but there's no doubt in my mind that chapter of Mormon history was riddled in tension and riddled in violence, straight up. Absolutely. I mean, the saints were fleeing violence when they came to Deseret, and I don't know. I feel like when I put myself in that scenario, I'm not justifying the actions, but what I'm saying is like, I just leave room for fallibility. And I feel like the big thing that people run into in the church is they sing songs like Follow the Prophet or, Praise to the Man. And they have this heroic, worshiping attitude toward prophets and apostles, but it's not appropriate. And I think that was an error. And I think that when people hold that position, they're most likely to read those quotations and feel a terrible emotional response and then seek to justify those emotions. And they don't know where else to go but to leave.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see the leaders of the church actively repudiate the idea that they're not that they are infallible, right? I think they do. I think they have made comments to that effect, but I would like to see them be more proactive about um, getting that idea out of members' heads. And when I say infallible, I guess not truly infallible. I mean, they're everybody's aware that they make mistakes, that they're human beings, but I think a lot of times they kind of do cultivate and promote this image of being, of not having a lot of mistakes. I think that they cultivate this image of like we're so holy that we can stand in the presence of Jesus in the temple, and it's like this really kind of promoting without. They know that there's these rumors out there that they are, you know, almost nearly perfect, and why can't they just say, hey, like we really aren't, and be more. I would like to see the leadership be more proactive about um, squashing those rumors, I guess, among members of the church, because I mean, I think in the past, they have they have said that, but I would like to see them be a little more proactive about that.
Right. You'd like to see a general conference talk or something about, hey, we've made mistakes and we can make mistakes.
Yeah, the last time that, and this is actually one of the quotes that I really liked, when President Uchtdorf said, he said, sometimes in the past, leaders of the church have made mistakes. Talking, probably referencing some of those quotes that I posted, but what happened to him a couple years later? He got demoted from the first presidency. So I don't know if there's a connection, but
I wouldn't necessarily say he was demoted. I mean, I know, like a lot of people saw it that way, but I feel like once President Nelson's gone, who's next in line? It's President Oaks. And so I feel like to get him in the first presidency and to, learn the ropes there is probably, gonna pay off in the end. And I don't really see it as a demotion, because I don't know. I guess I just don't see like rank in the church as much as others do. And I understand that there is a, authoritative structure, but I just feel like many, are called, but few are chosen. And a lot of people are chosen, but not called at the same time. In other words, a lot of people could fill those positions. President Uchtdorf was an amazing, member of the first presidency. And I just believe that he's totally qualifies for that still. And that not being in the first presidency doesn't mean that, he failed in some capacity or anything like that. But I do think that, I like that idea. I do think that it's important that people understand as members of the church that our leaders can make mistakes. And I feel like if people understood that very well, there'd be fewer people who kick against the pricks, if you will, or stumble upon a block and fall on their face. You know what I mean? And I just feel like that's, something that I would prescribe for my children and for members of the church, is to let's talk. And anecdotally in my, Sunday school, so I actually, I don't get to spend as much time in the Sunday school as I wish. I'm with the young men. But when I have been in there, these discussions that are difficult are had weekly. I mean, it doesn't take up the entirety of the meeting, but there's a portion where, people raise these questions and we're able to talk about them. And I feel like things are changing in that regard, but it's not doing what I think the critics think it would do and driving people out. I feel like it's hardening the testimonies of the people who are in. And it's, as for me, I would just like, to say, before I give you the floor to maybe share some quotes and maybe open up the phone lines, that learning about the imperfections of leaders of the church in the past, to me, has made me feel like I have a place in this church. And I'm not saying I relate to the racist quotes or, whatever. But I am saying that looking at, like, for example, Joseph Smith's folk magic or other things like that, when I look at those chapters, I feel more a part of things, because it's like, man, I've made silly mistakes too. Like if someone went into Brian's life or Carson's life and they dug up every bad thing ever said about you, or every bad thing ever said about me, and every bad thing I've ever said when I was angry or when I was just, tired or stressed or whatever, and they formed a giant composite of all of those things, no one would want to be around me. No one would
Yeah.
trust me.
I,
And-
I agree with that, and I think that's a fair, I think that's a fair point. Is if someone knew all the bad things that I had done or said, that would definitely same. They
Do
would
you in?
they
Yeah.
would be like, wow, you're a really bad guy. But at the same time, I'm not claiming to speak for God.
Right.
And so when I, if I ever stand at the pulpit, or everything I've ever said in my life is not me standing at the pulpit claiming to speak for God and speaking to people who think that I
Right.
speak for God, and that takes it to a different level. And that's why I think there's a different level of accountability that needs to be had for
Oh,
the leaders of
most
the church
definitely.
when they're acting in that capacity. So
Most definitely. I think that that is the highest
great
level
that
of
Carson is
accountability
back.
on this
Here's a
planet. And the
donation
fact
for
that
that
people
computer.
still mess up. It just, there's this quote from Jeffrey R. Holland, I'm totally going to botch it if I try and quote him, but he basically just said, we're all the Lord has to work with. And that must be
Yeah.
really frustrating, because if you look at families, their inner lives, if you look at history, it's entirely frustrating. Like there's no figure that's ever existed save Jesus Christ alone who was perfect. And any person, I would submit, if you were to look at all of their worst chapters in life, their worst blunders or mistakes, you're going to have the same effect. But my contention is this: even in the case of prophets who do speak for God, who are still imperfect, who still, so to speak, get swallowed by a whale, that I think that when we're trying to understand why people are in the church and why they stay, we have to, with the same grace that we would with you or myself, we have to look at how they look at the collective witness or the collective experience of positivity. And that's typically what they focus on, and how meaningful that is to them. And we need to be understanding of how precious and important that is to them, even if we don't agree. And sure, conversation is totally great. Let's talk. Let's talk about issues. But what I have a problem with, and you're not doing this, but I've seen others do it, is when we try to create a big giant word monster of all the, or a document that is designed to scare you, or designed to hurt your testimony, or designed to wake you up from the cult that you're in or something. I just feel like it's not entirely honest. And I think a lot of that's on the person that reads the document, because it's their job to go do the homework. But it's super easy not to. And it's super easy not to do the homework in the church too. It's super easy to just go with the flow. And I mean, it's no surprise to me when people do that. They get surprised and shocked when they haven't done their homework and they realize, oh my gosh, Brigham Young said what? So I don't know. So just, I'll give you a chance to respond to that one more time. But then after that, we only have a little bit of time left. I want you to go through maybe, let's just condense it to like one really important quote that's maybe controversial in the church. And we'll open up the phone lines and discuss that. And then maybe one positive quote, and we'll discuss that too. And then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, sounds good. So yeah, I think no, I think I agree with a lot of what you said. So essentially when I post my cherry picked quotes, they come through this phase and they're like, hey, I was really upset and frustrated and I was going. Totally, that doesn't last forever because it's just unsustainable, right? Is a forever. But for some people, it's probably healthy to have that time and that space to express those feelings and to talk to other people who are in the same space. So what's best for them and what makes them happy. And yeah, really, I'm kind of I would say reaching out to people who are already in that space. That's kind of my goal. So.
Cool. Awesome. Well, so let's go ahead and open up the phone lines. And Brian, go ahead and launch your most controversial, or perhaps just one that you think is very important quotation. And the number is on the screen. If you'd like to call in, please just remember to be respectful. It's time out of my life and time out of our guest's life to come on and do things like this. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, man. So, yeah, one of the quotes that I think it has gotten a lot of attention in the past is one from Spencer W. Kimball in his book Miracle of Forgiveness. Um, and I'll just read the quote. He says, "Also far-reaching is the effect of loss of chastity. Once given or taken or stolen, it can never be regained. Even in a forced contact, such as rape or incest, the injured one is greatly outraged. If she has not cooperated and contributed to the foul deed, she is, of course, in a more favorable position. There is no condemnation where there is no voluntary participation. It is better to die in defending one's virtue than to live having lost it without a struggle." I think that quote, you know, than to get raped and not put up a fight. And I think that for a lot of women, men can be raped obviously too, I guess, but for a lot of women who have been victims of sexual assault, I think a lot of times their response is not to fight back, it's to freeze. I mean, and they're not in charge of that response. A lot of times you've heard of fight flight, but really it's fight or flight or freeze, or there's lots of options for responses that people could have. And so when someone like Spencer W. Kimball, who's not a psychologist, who's not a doctor, he's not a paramedic or someone who responds to emergency situations, gets up and in the name and the voice of God writes a book as an authority, as a mouthpiece of God on earth, self-proclaimed. And he says something like this: women who have been victims of sexual assault, how do they hear that message? Especially if they view him as a prophet. Well, they view that as like, it would have been better for me to die than to have been the victim of sexual assault. And so for me, that quote is yeah, I can't see it as something that God would endorse. So
Okay, so let's just kind of so the phone lines are open. If anyone wants to call in and we can talk about this, you're welcome to do so. I'm going to go ahead and I feel like we're having some connectivity issues as to what the chat is saying. Not on your end necessarily, but on I guess mine. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and the phone lines are open. So the number is on the screen. That's 801-901 3015. You can call in and discuss with Brian and myself this quotation. I just if you could read that quote one more time.
Yep. Yeah, so he says, also far-reaching is the effect of loss of chastity. Once given or taken or stolen, it can never be regained. Even in a forced context such as rape or incest, the injured one is greatly outraged. If she has not cooperated and contributed to the foul deed, she is, of course, in a more favorable position. There is no condemnation where there is no voluntary participation. It is better to die in defending one's virtue than to live having lost it without a struggle.
Gotcha. Okay, so the phone lines are now open. Caller, do you have a question for me or our guest or a comment to make about that quotation? Hello, caller?
Hello, Carson.
Yes. Hello? Caller, you're on the air. Interesting. They hung up.
I heard him for a second, but
You heard them yeah, I heard them too. That's interesting. I'm looking at my settings and it looks like they should have been able to hear both of us. But well, that's just the nature of a first episode after a really long time is just ironing out all the kinks. Okay. Default device. Okay. All right. Well, everyone, the phone lines are open, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts about this. We only have a little bit more time, but yeah, please call in. Only if you're a well-meaning, good faith caller, of course. I don't want any calls that are not like that. We've had enough of that this episode. Yeah, it's honestly really, really frustrating. And I just can't believe that people don't have anything better to do than to just splash families with filth.
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. Okay, well, the phone lines are still open. I wonder if there's a problem with the stream or something. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I've had only minimal connectivity issues. So yeah, on my end, it seems like it's been stable, but yeah, and I can
Okay.
hear you fine. So
Okay, gotcha. I'll definitely edit this part out, of course, too, just so the viewers do not have to watch a big period where there's no talking or anything.
Sure.
I apologize about that. But we can all just do our best, So if you would like, just go ahead and you can talk about that quotation yourself and go in more depth than you did, and maybe we could
Sure.
just discuss it.
Yeah. I think that Spencer W. Kimball is he was a person. He's a human being. I give him grace for making mistakes, saying things maybe that he shouldn't have said, or even just making comments on subjects that he's not maybe informed enough on to form an opinion and share it. But if we just like even the first line, he says, "Also far-reaching is the effect of loss of chastity." Oh,
Right.
sounds like there's
Gotcha.
somebody.
Oh, caller, hello. You're on the air. Do you have a question for Brian or myself, or would you like to please comment on the quotation that he chose to share?
Yeah, Brian, with the quote you just shared, obviously you're critical of it. What would be the opposite, the justification or the kind of Mormon perspective to defend that quote?
Oh, are you asking him what if he'd like
Yeah,
to steel
Brian.
man like the best defense he possibly can for it? I mean, go ahead, take a swing at it if you want.
Like how would a believer maybe support the quote or agree with it?
Or yeah, either that, or are you asking how they would rationalize that quote, or how they would maybe react to it? Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, but I can't hear Brian at all. So
Okay,
mostly,
so
it seems
yeah,
like
how would
a terrible quote? Yeah.
How would you rationalize that if you were a member of the church? Or how do you think a member of the church would rationalize that defending Spencer W. Kimball? This will be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I think probably the most charitable interpretation of it is him saying, if she has not cooperated and contributed to the foul deed, she is of course in a more favorable position. There is no condemnation where there is no voluntary participation. So I think they'll probably focus on that and just say, well, clearly he's not talking about victims, because if you're a victim of sexual assault, then then he's saying there's no condemnation where there's no voluntary participation. And so what's your definition of voluntary? And if somebody froze up, well, then as their response, well, then they're probably not participating voluntarily. And I would also say this probably gets into a larger cultural conversation that's going on around sexual assault and
is not available.
a lot of people
Oh, sorry. Caller, is there a caller on the line? Hello? Oh, interesting. Okay. Sorry, just
Anyway.
ignore that.
No, yeah. So there's also been, I think, a larger conversation around, people saying, hey, you're victim blaming if you tell a woman that the way she's dressed or what she did had anything to do with it. And then there's people on the other side saying, well, putting yourself into certain situations can also result in, sexual assault or these kinds of things. And we need to be able to have an open and honest conversation about that. And so, I think that would probably be where the conversation would go, is them saying like, going down that path of saying like, well, maybe people do bear some responsibility for what happens to them if they're, XYZ. So I would think that would probably be where most people defending it would go. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, the way that I would, as a member of the church, maybe look at that is, I think that the quote is a bad quote. I don't think that is easy to defend, or one should defend that. I think Spencer W. Kimball was not, he was either very clumsy in what he was saying, or he was just wrong, frankly.
Yeah.
But I would look at it and say, chastity is something we learn in the scriptures that the Lord delights in. So if one were to, let's say, instead of volunteer their body to be taken advantage of, if they were to say, nope, kill me instead, I refuse. I think what he's saying is like, that person in that instance is, that's to go down in that way. You're 100% scot-free. Like you did nothing wrong. And I also think that it's also saying, or attempting to say, that in the case of the person that freezes, you say, or fights, okay, they fight against it, but they can't overcome the person that's attacking them, that they're also not morally culpable. But also that once it's taken, once that happens, you can't undo it. And if you ask anyone who has been raped, they would probably echo that and say, yeah, I cannot undo the trauma that I have now. Hello, caller. You're on the air. Can you hear me? Caller? Huh. We seem to be having a problem with our phone line. So, all right. No worries. But anyway, I think that like it's saying both of those things, that the person who, dies trying, like let's say the rapist chooses to kill them instead, that person is 100% not in the wrong, obviously. And so are the people that, fight or freeze. But if there's any portion of a person, I mean, to be raped is by definition involuntary. You know what I mean? You can't, in my view, be raped and then, decide that you're not being raped. I feel like you're either raped or you're not. You know what I mean? I don't feel like there's like much of a gray area, in my opinion. And so I think that's what Spencer W. Kimball is saying, is like, it's worth doing everything you can to prevent. But if you did not successfully prevent that, like let's say someone came and found you in the streets, Brian, and did that to you, and you had nothing, you couldn't fight, or if it happened to me, like I would not be morally culpable. Caller, you're on the air with Carson O'Kimball and Brian of Instagram at true_Mormon_quotes. Do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Hey, Carson, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, very good. It seems like you've been having issues with the phone lines, you and Discount Kirk Cousins. Anyway, so I just was kind of wondering, has Brett been bailed out of jail yet, or is he?
Okay. Hello, caller. You're on the air with Carson and Brian.
Hi, Carson.
Do you have any comments that you'd like to make about the quotation that Brian chose to share?
I don't know. Can you hear me, Carson?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
I'm sorry, I've come down with something lately. I think it might be the COVID again. But look, I'm glad you're back, buddy.
Well, thank you.
I really am glad you're back.
Great show, Carson.
We really missed you with the Mormon Talk community. And Brian, you're immense. I agree with you with a lot of the stuff, and I'm so happy you're all back.
Thank you. I appreciate it. What time is it over there in Ireland right now?
It is oh dear, 4:40.
Oh, or as they would say, far farty. Sorry, I don't have a very good Irish
You're
accent.
very.
I apologize.
I
But
can
anyway,
do
do
an
you have a
American
comment that you'd
accent
like
too.
to make about the quotation that Brian shared?
Well, I just missed that, but I would like to know what you were mentioning earlier on Twitter about the dog sacrifice. Is that legit?
What dog sacrifices?
On Twitter, you and some of the people who was trolling you said that Joseph Smith sacrificed dogs.
Oh no, that couldn't be furthest from the truth. Joseph Smith never sacrificed dogs. A lot of people like to say zany things just to try and get a rise out of people, but I just choose to ignore them if I can, and if I feel like it's possible to maybe come to a reasonable conclusion or to understand one another, I'll engage. But if I don't think that's possible, I just won't.
Oh, that's great. Is it okay to do one more prayer with you?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay.
Both yes, on will, on Cadagum, o Dulgadi on Letras, and Moshe Ohole. It's an old Irish prayer to God.
What does it mean?
Well, it's about God destroying his enemies. It started during 800 years ago when the English invaded Ireland
Oh, okay.
and slaughtered our people.
Oh, well, wonderful.
You know the story and
Oh,
the famine.
well,
It was
wonderful.
awful time.
Thank you,
Look,
Howard, for that.
I'm so glad you're back. It's great to have you back. Brian, you're a great lad. Keep it up.
Okay. Well, wonderful. Thank you, Howard Adderley. Okay. Well, I think that that just about, does it for that quote. Now, I'll just give you one more chance. Let's share maybe like a positive quote. You're not a member of the church anymore, but you have a great gift, and that is you don't appear to have hate for people who are, or for people who believe differently than you, or people who, the things that have dissuaded you from remaining in the church maybe would not dissuade them, which a lot of people get really frustrated with, because it's like, if I left over this, I need to justify that by you leaving too. Otherwise, by implication, you might think I'm wrong or something. So you're not like that. I really appreciate that. Let's, if you could share one positive quote that you
Sure.
maybe still hold dear.
Yeah, if you don't mind, could I also make a comment about what Howard said?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead and do that first.
So there are some source documents that are, I couldn't quote you, which primary source documents or if they were firsthand, secondhand, but from some of the people who were on treasure digs with Joseph Smith, who claim that animal sacrifice was part of the process of searching for buried treasure. Again, how reliable those are, I'm not totally sure. Some of them say that there were chickens sacrificed as part of the process. Some of them mention a dog. So anyway, that's where that comes from, and whether or not the research bears out, whether that's actually true, I'm not 100% sure. But I'm aware of at least some primary source documents from history saying that animal sacrifice was a part of the process of Joseph Smith and some of those other people that were searching for treasure, part of their process. So of getting past the guardian spirits that guarded the treasure, that kind of thing. So but so anyway, that's probably where that came from. But the I would say my positive quote that I would love to share and just say something about would be from President Uchtdorf. I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but he said this in his talk. He's talking about lots of wonderful benefits of being a member of the church, and then he says one might ask, if the gospel is so wonderful, why would anyone leave? Sometimes we assume it is because they have been offended or lazy or sinful. Actually, it is not that simple. In fact, there is not just one reason that applies to the variety of situations. Some of our dear members struggle for years with the question whether they should separate themselves from the church. In this church that honors personal agency so strongly, that was restored by a young man who asked questions and sought answers, we respect those who honestly search for truth. It may break our hearts when their journey takes them away from the church. We love them and the truth that we have found, but we honor their right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own conscience, just as we claim that privilege for ourselves. And I think that's just a really, open-minded and compassionate way for a leader of the church to express that. And I think it's unfortunate that we don't see more leaders willing to say things like that. And I think we're getting there. I think more leaders are willing to say those types of things, and I would like to see it more. Frankly, sometimes, too often we see them saying, giving examples of why leaving the church was a bad idea and this and that. But I think that's a great example of just a really compassionate, open-minded quote from a church leader.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you. It doesn't look like we have any more calls coming in, but I'd just like to thank everyone that tuned in, and I'd most importantly like to thank our guest. If you'd like to find some quotes that might be more, problematic and interesting to research, if you have an Instagram, his account is at true_Mormon_quotes, and you can read the context and comment your views. But that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. And I'm sorry for all the families that are watching that had to see filth or hear filth splashed all, through their screen. I'm sorry about that. And I hope that, I hope that doesn't happen in the future. And if it does, we're going to have to do some serious changing of things around here. But anyway, thank you again, Brian. And it was wonderful to have you on to hear your perspective.
Thanks, Carson. I appreciate it.
There's a place I've come to know where the righteous always flow. It's a beacon for my soul. It is called Mormon Soul. Carson, show me hope. That happiness is mine. Jesus takes my load through the rough and tumble time, and I will raise all the curtains up, unlatch the window to His love. I will bow my head to Thee, fast and pray. Get There's a place I've come to know where the righteous always flow. It's a beacon for my soul. It is called Morning Star. Carson, show me hope that happiness is mine. There's a place I've come to know where the righteous always flow. It's a beacon for my soul. It is called Morning Star. Carson, show me hope that happiness is mine. Jesus takes my load through the rough and tumble time, and I will raise all the curtains up, unlatch the window to His love. I will bow my head to Thee, fast and pray, get on my knees and say, I will pray. There's a book that draws me near to His everlasting light, and the truth is witness clear, and I know what's wrong from right. Riker shows me hope that eternal life is mine. Jesus takes my load through the rough and tumble times. I will raise all the curtains up, unlatch the window to His love. I will bow my head to Thee, fast and pray, get on my knees and say, I will pray. And I hear the voice of Carson Kimball say, hold on to the rod. And I hear the song in every interlude, hold on to the rod. 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 And I will raise all the curtains up, unlatch the window to His love. I will bow my head to Thee, fast and pray, get on my knees and say, I will pray.
Dude, you said this wouldn't happen. No.
I will pray.
Yeah, you were watching. Why didn't you call me, man? Yeah, you could have literally called me. No, you didn't. I had my phone literally sitting right in front of me, dude. Yeah, well, you didn't add enough. Dude, it doesn't matter how many came in. I don't even care about. No, I don't care about that number. That doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is like literally this is my first time doing this again in forever, and it's not it. I know you didn't mean to, dude, but like, come on, man. Like, is there any way we could just like take it off entirely? Yeah, but that didn't. Okay, yeah, I understand, but that didn't work this time, Wilson. Like, How many did you add? Okay. No, don't say the word. No, just okay. P F. Okay. Yeah, but there's other P's that you didn't add. Yeah, and they seemed to be a word of choice from some of the people that were splashing families tonight. Well, okay. Then okay. Yeah, can you do it from your house, or do you have to come over to our house? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Thanks, man. All right. Love you too. Freaking making me look like a freaking English jumper.